Hi, everybody. This is PJ here at the top of the show, letting you know that due to a hand injury, Crossland is kind of working through some difficulty, and we are unable to record our episode at our normal time, which means we're pushing it to next week. So instead, we are presenting to you a short pour that we had been planning on putting out on the 11th Metal. I hope you enjoy. And I apologize for this delay, but we will resume our coverage of Mistborn Era 2 next week.
Welcome to Words and Whiskey Short Pours, a monthly podcast where we have a fun time discussing fictional worlds and the people that create them, all while boozing just a little bit. My name is Cross, and today I'm joined by my illustrious co-host PJ, and we are going to be chatting about The 11th Metal, a short story that takes place inside of Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. Kind of a prequel to the whole thing. Obviously, with that, please note, we've finished Era 1 at this point. We're going to be talking about all of Era 1. So, PJ, hello.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, we have finished Era 1. We are going to be talking about it, but this is before that, which is pretty cool.
Sure.
Definitely a different kind of vibe than what we're used to, but I enjoyed this book. Story.
Yeah.
This chapter of a story.
Yeah, it's effectively, this is why I didn't want to necessarily devote, I remember when I was going through and planning the schedule, I didn't want to give this one a full episode by any stretch, but I was like, we could do a micro short pour this week or last week. I can't remember when we thought of it. And I was like, oh, it's like a chapter and a half roughly in terms of length. So we could do a little short pour on it. So
Here we are.
Doing a little episode.
I think this is going to be our first short pour. And I know that's knock on wood, but we tend to still go quite a ways.
It's true. We have a tendency to be a little long-winded. So with that, I think it makes sense for us to get into what we're drinking today on the show, and I'll let you start. It's intentionally, we're trying to make this short. So
yeah, I just have a beer today. It is called Ridged Chips from Eagle Park Brewing Company. It's a hazy IPA with Status, Citra, Lotus, and Mosaic hops. Brewed in collaboration with 3 cellars. I'm not familiar with them. But yeah, just a very, very solid New England. Nothing super standout about it, but impressed by it.
I dig that. The can art is super cool, folks. I know obviously you can't see it, but it gives me first grade, kindergarten, stitched together quilts, and very homey elementary school vibes.
All sort of based on sort of picnic vibes.
Yeah.
Grill out, barbecue vibes.
I was even just saying about the coloring and the art styling.
That's true.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yes. What about you, Crossland? What are you drinking?
Oh, it's really simple, PJ. I'm having a very dry martini.
Define very dry for us.
Well, so, the sausage gets made in a particular way inside of the show. And generally we would be having a cocktail. However, I swapped up diets recently and didn't quite prepare correctly. So, PJ, what I'm sipping on is a shot of vodka. It's a very dry martini. I can't have a beer because of the diet. And I have to, I could have a martini, but I actually, in addition to not having the time, I do remember while sitting here, I don't have the prerequisite vermouths on.
Yeah. You're 2 ingredients away
my
from
brother's
a
place.
Martini.
Yeah, so it is an extra dry. It's just vodka. It's fine.
You're not even drinking it out of a martini glass.
I'm 100% drinking it out of my little tiny beaker shot glass.
We forgive you.
Also lets me know that I drank precisely what I drank. It's Rakia. It's so good. Folks at home, we don't rant about Rakia to you almost immediately unless you are a patron, in which case you can hear all of our various doubles cuts in which we talk about so much stuff. But more often than not, we start by talking about how good Rakia vodka is.
That's true.
Almost every time. Unofficial, official sponsor. All right. With that, let's get into the 11th Metal. Starting off, we've been doing this lately. How'd you feel about the story overall? What were kind of your overall thoughts of this short story and short entry? We've dipped into Era 2. We're not going to talk about Era 2, but now dipping back into Era 1. What do you think?
It was a bit of a shock as far as like just jumping into a completely different culture, and at that, a completely different culture from what we were used to before. But at the same time, kind of nostalgic. I'd been missing the power that Kelsier provides as a character. And while he's young here, it's evident how strong he is, and it's really kind of cool to see him grow up a little bit.
Yeah. And, you know, there is like a slight question of like how far away this is from the events of the Final Empire. But that said, it does feel like you almost don't want to say like immature, because Kelsier is fully mature, but he hasn't changed into the person that we see him as fully in the Final Empire yet.
Mm-hmm. We do have sort of a timeline, right?
You can roughly assemble a timeline. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because he says it like takes a couple months out from when he left the pits.
Yes.
And when we meet him in Mistborn, it's like 2 years.
That sounds right.
It's something like that.
Yeah. There's not even a good timeline on 17th Shard because they can't really work it out. Okay. Roughly. Yes.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in that realm. Enough time where he became an expert with his allomantic capabilities. And we have heard the name Gemmel before. He was mentioned a couple of times in the Final Empire, so this is not, this is on our first brush with him, which is cool to finally get to see, like, oh, the guy who trained Kelsier. And come on, like, he's not... did you expect this out of Gemmel?
He's a wild dude. There's a character in... I'm not super well versed in Avatar: The Last Airbender, but there's a character in that show that I remember that I imagine when hearing the description of Gemmel. Do you know who I'm talking about? Some old haggard dude?
Yeah, sorry. Are you talking about his earthbender friend of whom ends up becoming the king or the emperor of the Earth Kingdom? Yeah, I also forget his name. My brain said Shibumi when you said that. I don't think that's right. But anyway, point being, yes, I totally know exactly who you're talking about. I don't know if you had looked at the art that's at the front of this short story at all, but it has a depiction of Gemmel.
I did not.
In it, right next to Kelsier. I'll just send it to you because I've got it up here. It is, yes. Basically, my end point being here, yeah, that's pretty much spot on for like my thought as well when I was reading it and the kind of descriptions of him. He is a haunted kind of looking old man with like blown out hair, almost exactly as you described. Maybe just add like a full beard that enshrouds his entire face like a sun. Like I
might have seen this,
okay.
And like subconsciously, that's why I thought about it like that. That could be the case.
Yeah, that makes sense. It also, that same image that's in Arcanum Unbounded is a really great depiction, I think, and a really unique depiction of the Mist Cloak. That's the other thing that I really liked from that image. So just the writing is it gives it even a more ethereal feel than it has even in the story because of the way the wind's blowing against it.
Yeah, the way it's described in the book is more like tassels off like the tail of a coat, kind of. That's if a cloak had a tail, that's kind of how it's described in my mind. But this comes off of kind of the back and shoulders and everywhere.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a very cool depiction, and it's cool also to see Kelsier there smiling smugly, and old man Gemmel, who in the depiction also looks like he's missing an eye. So, man, he's definitely a kooky one. But to get to the actual story itself, we open the story with Kelsier well before the events of the Final Empire, and his internal monologue is very different than what we see here in that original trilogy, I think. The original trilogy, the first book, he doesn't make it past that. Isn't it crazy how he sounds even like more closely associated with thievery? Like he sounds like a grounded thief here. I love the way that it starts that way.
And that's what he's trying to break, which I find more interesting, is that he's trying to break that thought process. And Gemmel's trying to break it of him as well, of something that he's so good at. And if he had just embraced that more, it would have been really, really interesting how the interactions with the crew would have been differently. But
I actually, interestingly enough, I think this depiction adds a lot of complexity to comparing like Vin and her inability to merge those two sides of her together right away and how they conflicted and competed, and how Kelsier just buried one under the other, basically. Like, he still has some of the thieving crew elements, but even as you think to what he was actually trying to accomplish, a lot of it wasn't. It was a con man game in the long run, sure, but he wasn't exactly pulling off a great heist or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
But then there's the, for better or worse, his instinct was to go into it non-violently and subtly, infiltration, as opposed to just straight up violence like Gemmel is pushing him towards.
Yeah. And Gemmel is pushing him that way, of course, because of something that's going on in his head. Gemmel is, as we're introduced, like we had described him previously, quite nutty, not only in physical appearance, the disheveled, scratchy, gruff old man, but in addition, he's just sort of a general oddity. Throughout the story, the Mists are repulsed by him as he's flying through, versus Kelsier's kind of feeling their touch and their lick on his legs and kind of seeing them all over the place. He's talking to random voices that no one else can hear and seems to be muttering to himself a whole lot. You know, what about Gemmel?
Well, there is a comment made in this book that talks about Ruin's influence on Kelsier. And it makes me wonder if that influence is through Gemmel or if there was separate, like, direct influence of Ruin on Kelsier. But it seems pretty clear. I mean, just through the context clues and through what we know about hemalurgy, he's got a hemalurgic spike somewhere on his body, and he is talking to Ruin. Like, that's got to be the case. So I'm assuming the comment about Ruin's influence on Kelsier is this, through Gemmel.
Yeah, I think almost entirely, right? Because Kelsier was not weak of will or mind, didn't have any hemalurgic spikes. So, yeah.
That we know.
I think it's entirely, well, yeah. It would be so dicey
to introduce that after the fact.
Yeah, I would feel very cheated. If it was so much more direct versus, like, basically what Ruin does is he sets him on a path, and he already has, like, Kelsier already has all the ingredients to want the revenge that he seeks because of what happened in the Pits of Hathstain and because of the Lord Ruler's actions. So, like, he doesn't need that much more of a shove, but he did need some tools to get there, which is what Gemmel is giving him in terms of helping him train with power and, you know, teaching him to act and behave a certain way, is a much more subtle touch, which is also, according to what we know before Ruin's let out, all he was really able to do was talk directly with spiked people, and even then subtly and not nearly as powerfully as he could later in the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is why you have all those examples of God in the head, you know, from Zane and whatnot. And obviously, at the same time, Gemmel is clearly affected with the same sort of penchant for killing and murder by Ruin, likely saying the same thing of, like, kill him, kill him, kill them all, you know? It seems, especially based on his reaction. And, you know, to the point of what we were saying about Kelsier, it feels like it kind of forges him into a more blunt instrument when before he was a deft knife a lot of the time.
But I'll put up the argument that this allows him to think with the idea of violence being an option. Whereas otherwise, I think he'd go about everything non-violently, which could be noble and could be good, and he'd get probably pretty far, but he wouldn't get nearly as far as he does.
Yeah. I think that definitely this is Ruin and or Gemmel, like, enabling him to get a lot further by turning him into more of a tool to actually take out the Lord Ruler and kind of create this mythos and mythology. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. I don't think that he would be... I'm not necessarily saying that one's better than the other or anything like that. I'm just saying that this is, like, you can see where the character changes to some degree from a knife to a hammer. And capabilities change when that happens. You know, a knife is really ineffective at taking out rocks, and this is a really big boulder that he has to break in the form of the Final Empire. So, you know. Yeah.
It does bring up a good sort of thought experiment, though. What happens to Vin if this doesn't happen to Kelsier?
Well, they caught on to Vin because of her little thievery moment. So I feel like he still would have latched into Vin. I feel like that's hard to
but
circumvent.
What does she become? She becomes forged in Kelsier's image as it stands.
Yeah.
which would be more subtle and less violent.
Well, I guess that's a great point. She would still probably be the knife because she sees a more noble side to what Kelsier was doing, which I think is maybe an argument that we could make a little bit, is that like she becomes what Kelsier could have been had he not been taught by Gemmel. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know,
fair.
I'm not saying that holistically, you know, thought experiment, right? Like I don't know if I have perfectly solid feet to stand on, but I feel like that's a point.
Yeah, that's fair.
I didn't even mean to bring up the knife conversation. I was just thinking a deft weapon, and we fully circled the drain. Exactly. I do want to bring up kind of the premise of this book as a whole, which is that it is an insert into a game book. Like, this is entirely for an RPG system, and so it is meant to also give you an introduction and an explainer on how the world and allomancy and sort of the tone of the world works on the whole. So it does what every other Mistborn story does in the way that it tells you basically what all of the metals do and explains them, some through action, some not, and the way that the blue lines pop out. It's classic Mistborn, but it's just repeated to such a degree and reinforced here because it has to be for the game book that it's in.
Right. Yeah, there's the postscript after the last page of the book talking about, from Brandon Sanderson's point of view, talking about why he wrote this, and the idea being to give flavor to the world of anybody who hasn't read the books yet. And I think it does a pretty good job of that. We only hit some of the metals. We mostly get a description of steel and iron, which is honestly probably good enough. They're the most complicated and they're the ones that need the most nuance in description. Whereas the other ones can be very easily explained, like, oh, it increases your stamina, or tin increases your vision and perception. Stuff
Even
like
that we get an explainer on, though, like the fact that he can see through the mist because of tin, which, again, is a parallel. We talked about that recently, and, you know, relatively recently on an episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, you do raise a fair point. It does bring up all of the metals, but not everything gets explored as widely as steel and iron do, of course. Like, they talk for a bit about emotional allomancy because he goes from going thievery to like, well, I can push and pull on emotions then. And Gemmel's like, no, you can just fucking kill him. Just fucking kill him. Stop with all of this nonsense.
I do want to try this game at some point. Do you know if it's available?
Yeah, totally. It's commercially available.
Okay, we should play it.
Yeah. It'd be a fun thing to do on a Catacomb Party one shot or some such. The 17th Shard is doing a podcast called Diceborn. I think it's a once monthly show, if I remember correctly, where they're basically doing a playthrough. But they're doing it within Era 2 because there's an Era 2 expansion book. So,
gotcha.
And some more interesting setups and rules there. So
I can't watch it.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Not until like December. You know, it's not that far away.
I mean, that might be when I find time anyway.
True. That said, I did want to make mention, of course, of this flower that Kelsier is drawing. All the way back in the beginning, we've been talking kind of a little bit all over the place, but there's this picture of a flower that Kelsier is drawing on a little sheet to try and remember the photo that Mare had, and sort of this really, in the end, fairly critical little piece of information here, or fairly important theme and motif throughout the story. This is an artifact that's carried throughout the whole story. What'd you think?
I think it makes some final decisions and like the resolution of the story even more touched by Kelsier, if that makes sense. Because this isn't necessarily what the flower actually looked like. And it got revived and recreated in Mare's image, but it's really Kelsier's interpretation of Mare's image. So it's kind of a funny little note to tack on there, but does make sense. I mean, it's a focus for Kelsier to remember Mare.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think it's a really... It becomes something that's so central as it's also shared between characters over time, as sort of this passing of the torch of Kelsier. And you could say of like Mare's dream for the future in its own right. And as that goes from individual to individual, going from that to Sazed to Spook, and just kind of the whole allotment as it starts to hand its way down, I think it's a fantastic little image. Great point, though, on there's a lot of sort of there's a lot that's a little mushy here that's not perfectly well defined of like, did Kelsier maybe in the intervening time between this story and the book find it, or did he just get really good at drawing it? Because in the story, he's said to have drawn it like a dozenth time at this point. Is it just that he got so good and he actually was able to draw it decently, or did he actually go back and get the photo? Like, it's totally up in the air.
Right, that's true. But at least it's more context than what we had before. But I guess technically it is more muddy.
Yeah, context muddied the water a little bit, but I think it does make it interesting, like you were saying, because there is that bonus question of like, is this flower that is blooming at the end of Era 1 fictitious, not a fictitious creation necessarily, but an artificial creation based on Kelsier's draw? Like if I drew a fucking plant and you became God and had to do something with it, I would feel so bad because I'm so bad at drawing. Those plants would look awful.
They'd look so fucking bad.
They would look so bad. They would look like worse than pixel art. Like so bad.
It'd be kind of funny though. I'd love to seed the world with drawings that you made because that is a nightmare.
Oh man,
a horror show, but in the most comic way.
It's like all of the in the Nintendo game canon. It's like all of the WarioWare game drawings that are everywhere that are like super fucked up version of Mario stuff.
But worse.
Yeah, that's like my drawing, but way worse. Yeah, that's like intentionally obtuse. I just lack that physical dexterity. I love that idea now where I'm like, maybe the flower isn't really the real original flower now. And that's fucking with my head a little bit.
Because it's described that Kelsier carries it around in his pocket in both the first book and in this one. And I think if he found the photo, he wouldn't just carry it around like that anymore. Maybe he would. He probably would,
yeah. But even then, like, there's also a question raised, I think, in general. And we know that the Larsta, the religion that Mare worships, that worships the plants and flowers and stuff like that, is one that is also of creativity and stuff like that. So it makes a lot of sense that it would like overlap a little bit with this flower and sort of the natural beauty of things. But when you describe something as a photo, I'm thinking camera. Is it a painting? Would it age? Like, that's where I also think that Kelsier's drawing also makes more sense because it would be something that's a little bit newer. It might hold up a little bit better. He could have done it with something that looks a little bit more permanent. Didn't have color, so painting feels weird.
The color was described, though.
I think that was verbally described.
That was just verbal?
Yeah, I think it was just Kelsier talking in the moment. Gotcha. About the flowers and the green grass and like the sort of what we would call vibrant, but what Vin thought was very strange as far as a landscape could be, the idea that grass would be green and whatnot. So,
right. True.
Yeah. So we have to talk about our antagonist here, of course, and we get to the entire point of the core of the story is that A, Gemmel is training Kelsier to be a Mistborn. B, there are some metals, or there are some new potential metals that are here that Gemmel wants to take from Lord Shezler as he's heard about them. Particularly, of course, it's the namesake of the story. It's the 11th metal that they're finding inside of this place. And there's all of these people in the basement that are being experimented on and treated very poorly. And it's the big oof. They're being, mistreated with metal and abused in various ways, killed, starved.
They're attempting to snap them, right?
Yes. Yeah. Attempting to snap them and then test metals if they snap. And Lord Shezler, absolute fucker. This story is definitely one of the darker entries in Mistborn, period. Bar none. Of, at the very least, the original trilogy, and definitely the darkest that we read so far.
I brought up at one point the idea of sacrificing Ska to make an army, and like 16% of the time you'll find someone, is basically kind of the way I framed it. This guy's actually doing that. And it's fucked.
Yeah, it's super fucked. Reminds me a lot of the road in that book and sort of the sequence where people are locked under the floorboards. Anyway.
What it reminds me of initially, and I know there are like real world parallels and like examples that this is derived from, but Thesed from the Wolfenstein games, that's the vibe I got off of this guy. Just total fucked experimentation.
Yeah, without purpose and against a people that, are dehumanized.
Mhm.
So yeah, totally. It does give me really big Death's Head vibes from Wolfenstein New Order. Yeah.
Great game.
It's great game.
Fucked character.
Fucked antagonist. Yeah. I love that comparison. And I do enjoy how dark this story is, not in particular because of the implications of Shezler itself, but it does feel like through Shezler, I think I brought this up near the end of our Hero of Ages coverage, maybe in the wrap-up episode even, but a lot of Brandon's writing paints even the worst of our antagonists for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, as good people innately, or like mostly innately good people. And this does paint a guy as just an awful, absolute trash piece of shit, which is good because we get a little bit of vindication in his death.
Yeah, you get to just kill him. The closest one that we get is Sean Ilario.
Straff. Yeah, but those two.
Straff. Fucking Straff.
Those two basically, though.
Zane.
Yeah, but Zane...
But like, Zane's more complicated than that.
Zane's more like Gemmel. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point being is that you're still we're still counting on one hand for 3 massive books the number of, super bad human antagonists inside of the story. And it's nice to have Shezler from the perspective of him being someone who is definitely bad and does paint a negative picture on the noble group on the whole, which also reinforces Kelsier's views that like all nobles are bad. Totally get it. But
kind of seeds him with the worst one.
Yeah, it seeds him with a terrible example, which again, there is that underlying question of like the overall implication of this story is the influence of Ruin on Kelsier's path, right? And be that direct influence through Gemmel, in which we can assume is spiked, and the reason that he's talking to himself and everything else, the 11th Metal being brought to attention, really kind of setting up a lot of that mythology. So, including things like reinforcing Kelsier's hate for noblemen. The fact that we also get it exposed here that Kelsier and Marsh were raised basically in noble houses and then make their way out and become, embrace kind of the half ska side of themselves is also a really fascinating reveal, because it puts him on like a similar tone to Breeze. But Breeze isn't half ska.
Yeah, there's that. I felt like we already knew that, though. Maybe we didn't know that he was raised there, but
yeah, I don't think we got that extent of information.
Yeah, maybe not. But that is, good to point out.
Because I feel like Vin would have used it against him. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like Vin would have, in set of arguments, been like, you were raised in a noble house, you prick.
Maybe we got it from Marsh later.
That could be it. That would make more sense. Yeah, I mean, okay, core point being, though, like, this is mostly new information.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, new in presentation from Kelsier.
Mm-hmm.
So, paints him as a little bit of an unreliable narrator now that I think about it, too. Even though maybe it's just a small oversight on Brandon's part. But it does lend a little bit of, like, you telling us the whole truth, buddy?
Yeah. One thing I have a question about is, how does Gemmel know about this experimentation happening? And as an answer to that, Lord Shezler, has he spiked himself accidentally with a spike that he killed somebody with and got Ruin's sort of influence? And that's how Ruin knows about this happening and tells it to Gemmel. Like, I could see that being the sort of path through things.
That, or Shezler spiked someone like a ska in experimentation. Those are my two thoughts as well. I don't think there's any necessary immediate clarity to that, but it's very clear that Ruin has information about this location and then positioned Gemmel as such. We're talking about this with authority over the end of the books, right? Like, this has to have worked that way, given kind of our understanding of the system at large. So I agree with you. I think that that's the most likely case. The only other case that I can think of was the second one I brought up with like spiking a ska as an experiment, but he doesn't seem to be experimenting in hemalurgy so much as just general torture to snap people and then testing different metals.
Right.
So alloys. Can we say, I know that this is kind of something that we maybe could have talked about a long time ago, but the fact that Kelsier has a whole bar of malatium, like a lot of malatium, how much atium is in the alloy? You know what I mean? Like, because atium is small, rare, and expensive. So stealing this like bar is a lot of metal. Regardless, he ends up with this, brick of malatium. That's a fuck ton of atium to get it to stabilize to this other metal. Also, we know that the Lord Ruler, I guess he was experimenting with hemalurgy more or less, so it wouldn't be not quite the same. But I was just picturing. But yeah. Yeah. And just sort of the idea that like Ruin has had his hand so heavy in the game from so early. It's something that we fully explore inside of Hero of Ages, right? But just even this extra little bit to say that Kelsier was this influenced, like, yeah. It's just that extra tipping on the scale to
yeah, it's really
point to Kelsier more as a pawn.
It's so cool. It makes it so much more complicated. But also, for me, it makes a lot more sense. I like the extra context that this gave.
I think it's great. I would agree with you. I think that it does a great job providing ample points to show Kelsier's growth and to give him a little bit more of something, as he is such a necessary character for the foundational change that we see throughout Mistborn Era 1, and like setting up Vin and setting up Spook and like creating this group that transcends a crew. And to see that he started off on improper footing to get to where he wanted to go, despite the best of intentions, is great. I think. I think it's a great little nudge.
I agree.
So I think to that point, I've got one more thing that I kind of wanted to talk about here. And that's Kelsier's dealing with like an interesting degree of numbness throughout the story and a lot of emotional change. We talked a little bit earlier about this idea that like he's shifting in terms of moving away from a thief towards being a Mistborn. But you can even see like different moments of personality clash and PTSD from the pits kind of rear their ugly head a couple of times. And it's something that we kind of see throughout the first book of Mistborn, where he goes from like emotionally on to emotionally despondent, specifically like when he turns into hammer mode versus when he's talking to Vin. Hammer mode meaning like going and killing all of the people in the Tikiel Keep, I think, if I remember correctly.
Not the Captain Hammer mode, where the hammer is
not
my
Captain
penis.
Hammer. No, he never goes Captain Hammer. Mara's dead. I recently finished a book series in which the lead protagonist was definitely a virgin, and so much happened. And I was like, you didn't once fuck? Like, you didn't? Okay. All right. Anyway.
But just to kind of bounce off your points, I like the context that this gives us, because it makes his character make more sense and his emotionality make more sense throughout the first book, because we see him actively trying to overcome it and fake it till he makes it. Kind of the smiling is the biggest one for me, where he is constantly genuinely smiling, as it's described throughout the first book. And we learn here that it is practiced and learned and intentionally like just smile through it. So seeing this and seeing him like really work on it, like I said, makes him make more sense to me.
Yeah. To end up being the character that we know, love, and eventually dies.
Yep.
Yeah.
No love and forget about it.
No love and blends into the background of history, having inspired a whole fucking religion of like, we're saying he's dead and gone, but he is ultra present in the stories. So, all right, cool. Well, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about with the short story? I mean, it's a short story.
I think I'd like to do this again with the next one, because there's one more short story that I'm cleared to read. I think that'd be fun. I don't know when that would happen, but I'm looking forward to these little short stories.
Yeah.
They're fun.
It has been something that I've been considering since we moved away from the sort of full year of Sanderson by going right into the Stormlight Archive, instead doing a detour between Jade City and Lightbringer, Greenboat Saga and Lightbringer, maybe bringing in some of the short stories, but we're going to be reading full books a quarter. So we'll see. I think that one of the things that I definitely want to do is I do definitely want to do a short pour on The Emperor's Soul, which I think is a fantastic novella. It's the one that he won awards for, so it makes sense. Hugo, I think, for short fiction. And there's a couple of other ones that I really like in here. Obviously, we're covering Secret History on the main show, which is a novella that's inside of this book. And when we get to Stormlight, we will be reading the novellas, the like 200-page novellas that fit between books. So those are necessary reading for us. So we'll be tackling those as we go. But there's some short stories in here that I would agree with. Pits of Volantia, yeah, we can cover it. I have no problem with that.
All right.
So, yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to our show.
Be sure to check us out on social media. We've got a lot coming out. Clearly, we're working very, very hard. We're recording several times every single week, so we're having a lot of fun with it. But all of it's going to be coming out in different forms on the Atomic Pylon Media Network, so keep your ears out.
Yeah, and I think next month, be sure to keep an eye out on our Twitter and Instagram. This may or may not change, but I think we're going to do Warbreaker. I think we're going to try to cover Warbreaker this next month, which will be a lot of fun to talk and discuss Brandon's second Cosmere standalone novel. There are only two of them, and those are the two. So Elantris and Warbreaker so far. So I think that'll be the game plan. If not, we'll be covering it this fall, so you can definitely anticipate that coming up. But beyond that, you can check out all of the links to everything inside of the show notes. And you can see all of our fancy stuff. You can see the schedule, which is broken. But it's there. It's there. You can look at it. You can look at all the way through Hero of Ages.
If you're trying to connect with us on social media, we are Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. You can email us with whatever you want, wild shit if you want, at wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. Crossland mostly reads that, so whatever wild shit you want to send to him, there you go. And patreon.com/words and whiskey if you want access to Devil's Cuts, which we record before every main show. And a very, very fun community that we've curated on Discord that we are both very present in. Crossland interacts a lot more than I do, but I try. I try my best.
I try so hard. Yeah, no, it's totally cool. I would chalk that up more to a work from home job and a work from the office job.
A work from the office job without access to my phone because I do not get self-service at my desk.
Woohoo! We love it. We love it for everyone. But with that said, leave us a review if you can on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this show. Be sure to check out our main show. We're in the middle of Era 2. At the point that you're listening to this, we haven't finished Alloy of Law yet because this is coming out this week. So I don't know why I was trying to foreshadow. We're going to be finishing Alloy of Law very soon, going into Shadows of Self and the rest of Era 2. So follow along.
Y'all are fun.
Okay.
I love you.
Yeah. See you next week. Not really next month. Okay. Okay, I love you. Bye.